I have great pleasure in presenting Dr. Murali Thondebhavi from Bangalore, India. He is a consultant in anesthesia and pain management, Apollo Hospitals, Bangalore, and he has served as the honorary secretary of Karnataka chapter of Indian Society of Study of Pain, and he was a member and currently the national executive of the Academy of Regional Anesthesia of India. Presenting to you Dr. Murali Thondebhavi.
Good evening, one and all. At the outset, I would like to thank the team from Ganga Anesthesia Department for hosting yet another wonderful conference this year and giving me an opportunity to speak on something which is close to my heart. So, what I'll be doing in the next 20 minutes is going to be talking on what are habits and how we should go about tweaking them for a better life. So, coming to the disclaimer, I am not an expert on habits. I'm an anesthetist, and what I'm doing today is basically sharing my learnings with all of you. The outline of my talk would be to talk about the power of habits, the physiology behind what the habit formation is all about, the laws which guide habits, how to build good ones and break bad ones, a little bit about habits and parenting. Now, if you were to go to a bookstore, especially when you are flying in the airport, you would see a lot of self-development books, and a lot of them are on habits. So my talk today is based on some of the readings that I've done through these books, mainly the Atomic Habits by James Clear and The Power of Habit from Charles Duhigg. Now, the father of habits is probably this professor Skinner, who's a psychologist from US, who actually started this entire thing about conditioning and the analysis into behavior. And if you look at what the definition of habit is in a dictionary, you would see that it is basically a settled or regular tendency or practice, especially one that is hard to give up. Now, why do we form habits? It all boils down to our brain. It is to do with hardwiring of the synapses and giving us the precious limited cognitive resources to do other things. When we talk about habits, whenever you talk with anybody regarding habits, it's all about, okay, how to build good habits, how to break bad habits. But nobody talks about what the power of habits is. Now, let's take a flight which is originating in, say, New York and is destined to go to Madrid. Now, a small difference in the angle at the start can lead to a big difference in where this flight is going to reach. The habits are very similar. So let's take, you get 1% better every day. Now, 1% better every day might not look like a huge thing. But if you take a year, you are seeing that 1% every day will lead to 37 times increase in what you are. Whereas a 1% worse every day will just probably decrease it by 0.03. Now, this all boils down to a principle called compounding. Now, let's take this chart wherein a person started investing from the age of 20 and then went on to earn millions just by putting a small amount of money. Whereas somebody starting at 40, even putting 5 times the amount of money will probably not be able to reach even half. Now, the reason behind this is time multiplies whatever you feed it. So when we talk about habits, it's basically systems that we're talking about. So we need to forget the goals and focus on the systems. Now, if you take any kind of a competition, winners and losers have the same goals, but why do winners reach the goal? Achieving a goal is only a momentary change, especially for somebody who is focused on systems. And reaching a goal will not make you happy and later unhappy because you're now focusing on the systems. And goals definitely are at odds with long-term progress that we all want to achieve. So changing habits is challenging because we try to change the wrong thing and we try to change our habits in the wrong way. So let's take the circle, which is basically called the golden circle of behavior, wherein we have three circles. The first one inside is why. So we always ask a question why, and this comes down to the identity, and this is linked to the limbic system. The next circle is how, or we concentrate on the process. This again is part of the limbic system, whereas the outcomes of what happens is basically a function of the neocortex. So to give you an example, there was this friend of mine who used to smoke. Now, we used to, label him as a smoker because he used to smoke, and he decided to quit. Now, if you look at what happened when this person quit smoking, he did it because the doctor told him to quit because he had something else going on. Then, how did he do it? He didn't buy cigarettes, and outcome was he stopped smoking. So, in this kind of a behavior, we actually concentrated on the outcome. So this person said, yes, I have to stop smoking. Then he went inside, stopped the process, and then finally reached the identity of becoming a non-smoker. So this is an example of outcome-based habits. Now let's take an example of identity-based habits. Now here, the person actually changes the identity. So first he becomes a non-smoker. He says, no, I'm a non-smoker from tomorrow. So this immediately impacts on him, say, buying a cigarette or using a cigarette. And finally, what happens is he gives up smoking. So identity-based habits happen when you decide the type of person you want to be. You implement actions that the type of person would do and build evidence that you are the type of person. So in this case, decided to be a non-smoker, didn't buy cigarettes, and he built evidence to everybody around him saying that, yes, I don't smoke anymore. And finally, what happens? You feel good about yourself and reinforce the habit. So identity-based habits can be used in our day-to-day life, such as instead of saying the goal is not to read a book, but I'll become a reader. The goal is not to run the marathon, but I'll become a runner. And the goal is not to learn an instrument, but I would like to become a musician. So habits are about becoming someone, not having something. And better habits is not about changing small things in life. It's about trying to become someone better. And identity change is the key aspect of habit change. So what I'm going to talk in the next 15 minutes is talking about the identity change, not changing the outcome. So if we come to the science of habits, a habit can be broken down into four parts, which is the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward. And this happens in a temporal way. That is, the cue happens first and the reward happens last. And this is the backbone of every habit that you have in your life. Let's take an example. So the cue here is an alarm clock which goes off at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it can be a combination of visual stimulus, auditory, olfactory. The craving starts, like most of us, we reach for our mobile phone because we want to check what's happened on Facebook and then what's happened to the Instagram post that you posted last night. The response is definitely thoughts which translate to action. You pick up the phone and check your Facebook. And the reward comes. You had probably 15 or 20 likes for what you posted and increases the pleasant sensation. Now, what it does is the repetition of this cycle changes the brain structure. And all behavior is driven by the desire to solve a problem. So if we break down the backbone of our habits into two different phases, one could call it the problem phase, wherein you have the cue and the craving, and then you have a solution phase where you react to it and get response and reward. So let's take an example again of the problem phase is, yes, you walk into the dark room, that's the cue. The craving is want to be able to see something. The response is you flip the light switch and you satisfy your craving to see. Now, this turning on the light switch when you go into a dark room becomes a habit. So this is a simple example of what a habit backbone works like. So when we talk about breaking bad habits and building good habits, what we are worried about is basically the net outcome. And we have to kind of think long term when we talk about habits, not immediate. So if we take these four aspects of habit, we can call it the first law, the second law, the third, and the fourth law. And for creating a bad habit, we make it obvious, we make it attractive, we make it easy, and we make it satisfying. Whereas to make it break a bad habit, you'll make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult, and make it unsatisfying. So let's see what we can do with each of this. So how do we make the cue obvious? Now we can start off by having initially what we call as a habit scorecard. So we improve awareness of our habits. So example, waking up would be a neutral, checking my phone would be negative, going to bathroom would be neutral, again brushing my teeth positive, shower and meditate would be positive. So identifying what are the cues and how our habits are forming would be the first step. Then we need to remember that environment plays a huge role. It is an invisible hand in formation of habits. So we can have a formula wherein behavior that we have is basically a function of person interacting with the environment. And the obvious option in the environment will drive the action. And visual cues are the greatest catalyst for behavioral change in an environment. So let's take an example. You have a pillbox right next to you in the bedroom, next to the bed on the table. So you wake up, you don't forget your pills. You have a bottle of water sitting next to your desk when you're working. So you tend to drink more water and probably consume less caffeine. Neatly laid out sportswear probably will help you go for a jog or go to your gym in the morning. And of course, having a couple of books next to the bed will help you probably improve the habit of reading in the night. So behavior is nothing but relationship with objects, and an environment is filled with relationships. So be very careful of how your home is, how your room is, and this will change a lot of habits. And having one space and one use from it will actually not confuse the brain and reinforce good habits over a long term. Coming to time, again, this is a cue, and we need to be extremely specific, and clarity is very important here. So saying that I'll exercise at 6 p.m. in the local gym, giving it a specific time, telling that I'll read a book 30 minutes before sleeping, or I'll write my journal after brushing my teeth. So it gives very clear uh, time definition to your cue. So this is a common formula which you can say, I will do this behavior at so-and-so time in so-and-so location. So it's very clear. Now, another important concept is you can actually match one reward with the next habit. So you can call what is called as a habit stacking. So you follow one habit with another one. So an example for this is, yes, after I finish my dinner, I'll wash my plate. After washing the plate, I'll clean the kitchen. After cleaning the kitchen, I lock all the doors. And after locking the doors, I will do something else. So it helps actually form a nice habit of multiple habits in one go. Now, a simple habit stacking one-time rules would be saying that if I see a set of stairs, I'll take them instead of the elevator, so you become fitter. When a phone rings, I'll take a deep breath and smile before answering. This makes you probably more calmer. And you can say, when I want to buy something expensive, rather than being impulsive, I'll wait for 24 hours. So using cue to break a bad habit would be to make it invisible. So not having something that will trigger a habit is the best thing. So having moved from the first law, we'll go to the second one. Now, this starts off with what we call as a Tinbergen experiment, which was done in the 1930s, which won the Nobel Prize, wherein the scientist actually increased the number of red dots on a stick and saw the birdlings pecking on the mother bird. So the mother bird had one red dot. So increasing the number of dots increased the pecking rate of the tiny birds. Now what they proved with this is supranormal stimuli will produce more response. And this is because of our dopaminergic pathways, which always want more. So the wanting is what actually triggers this. So what do we see in our daily life? We see mannequins with exaggerated physique. We see, foods with what we call as a high dynamic contrast. We see models who are photoshopped and, of course, made to look extremely beautiful. And we have the cars which are made to kind of, look like they're from the future and we need to drive them. So what happens with this is we get this dopamine spike. So in the first one, you can see that the first time you experience something new, you get the dopamine spike at the level of reward. Whereas when you form a habit, you actually get the dopamine spike the moment you start craving. If you form a habit and you don't get the reward as expected, you get a dopamine dip. And then finally, if you have a dip and later you get the reward, the brain basically reinforces the habit much, much more. So wanting actually is a very, very important function of our brain, and there's a lot of pathways which are dedicated to it. So how can you use this to form good habits? So there is a concept called temptation bundling. So example, the need is exercise here, but your want is Facebook. So you can always say, after I pull out the phone, I will do 10 push-ups, and after I do 10 push-ups, I'll check Facebook. So the formula for this would be to say that after a current habit, I will do the habit I need. And after doing the habit I need, I will do the habit I want. So here what you're doing is you are putting the cost of the good habit in the present. So you can see that initially you have a dissatisfaction, that is a cost you're paying, but on the long term, you actually benefit from this habit. And the opposite happens with a bad habit, wherein you have the cost of it in the future, but you actually have a little bit of enjoyment in the start. Now, imitating habits is something, again, very important because we tend to imitate the habits of people who are close to us, people who are powerful, and the tribe. So if many people around us are doing the same thing, we tend to imitate them. So how can you use this to get the right habits? So you can join a gym where everybody is looking at fitness. You can join a yoga class. You can give up smoking in a group and go only with non-smokers. You can join a runners group. You can join a reading club. You can probably sing karaoke with your friends who do the same thing. And of course, being involved in academics in the department is the best way to probably read more. So coming to how to reprogram yourself to enjoy hard habits. A very simple thing. All you need to do is substitute the word have to get to. So instead of saying, I have to save for my future, you say, I got to save for my future, which is, I got the opportunity to save for the future. Many of us worked in the COVID ICU during the pandemic. So if you had to say, I have to work in COVID ICU, you are going to suffer the entire time. But if you were to say, I got to work, I got an opportunity to serve people, I got an opportunity to work in the COVID ICU, it's a way of enjoying that hard work. I have to exercise, it's the same thing. You can always say, I got to exercise. I'm fortunate that I'm able to go and do exercise. So this is one way of enjoying hard habits. Now, using craving to break a bad habit, that is the second law, is to make it unattractive. Now, quickly looking at response. Always remember, don't plan too much. You need to act because repetition is important and neurons that fire together wire together. And habits always are entry choices because during our day-to-day life, we are faced with many choices, and habits, having a good habit will give you an entry into good choices that you would make during the day. And always make the first 2 minutes of any habit learning easy. So this is called basically a 2-minute rule, wherein to start any habit, make it very, very simple. So to give you an example, you got to run 3 kilometers, just tie your running shoes for a few days. You got to study for a class, just open a textbook. So ritualize the beginning of the process, and you also standardize before you optimize. So start doing it first before you think of optimizing it. And one-time actions can lock a lot of good habits, like example, using smaller plates to improve diet, buying a good mattress to help you sleep, turning off the phone to a silent mode to improve productivity, which I have done right now, and setting up an SIP to improve your finances. So using response to break habit to make it difficult and increase the friction in doing it. So coming to the last one, what is rewarded is repeated and what is punished is avoided. So to take an example, animals live in an environment where there is immediate returns, whereas humans, we live in a delayed return environment. Especially in the last 500 years, this shift has happened. But our brain is hardwired to still think like a caveman. So what we do is when we choose something, it might look good at the start, but later the consequences are bad. So this is called as a second order thinking. So we need to practice a thinking process where the future consequences are good. So how do you use this for making good habits? So if you want to reinforce a good habit, mix some immediate pleasure with a difficult task that you're doing. So like using a toothpaste with a flavor that you love to reinforce the habit of brushing twice, or mix immediate pain for bad habits. So you have apps to lock device if binge watching. And always remember, when you start a habit, what you think will happen is a straight line, but you have to go through the valley of disappointment where things won't work. So you join a gym, you won't get a six pack for probably 6 months, but that is the value of disappointment that you have to go through to reach success. So better habits we know will give better results. So we go from being unconscious and incompetent to being conscious about that habit, but still incompetent. Then we become conscious, then we become competent, then finally we start doing it unconsciously and we are extremely competent. So this stage, the stage 2 and 3, is basically where we have the awareness that what we are doing, but we are confused that we're not seeing the result. And the last one is where you develop mastery. And mastering a field is actually doing more repetitions, but improving after you reach a plateau so that you reach the next level. So we have gone through everything. We have gone through all the 4 laws of how you can use the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward to improve habits. How do you track habits? So it's very simple. You can download one of these habit trackers from the net. Select which habits you are trying to do. Tick, accordingly every day so you can see the progress. So in parenting, I tend to use a habit tracker for the kids. So I give them a few things every month, and I've got 2 sons, and they tend to take this and they will have some incentives at the end of the month for the number of days they've done their habits. Journaling is another good way to kind of build a good habit of writing down and also keeping a track of your habits. So you can probably just write 1 line a day about what happened, what you're grateful for, what was the most important task you did, and how you slept, which would be a sleep journal, and how do you feel, which is a mood journal. So to summarize my talk, I had to cover a lot in 20 minutes. I probably overshot by a minute or 2. You need to aim for improving 1% every day. The compounding effect is key to any habit. Never interrupt the process. So not even a day. Even if you miss a day, you immediately get back. Apply 2-minute rule at the start of any good habit for probably a couple of weeks, and then start optimizing the process, and use all the laws which I spoke about to create good ones and break bad ones. Thank you.